In a crowded hall in the Sicilian town of Messina, a 17-year-old girl with dark hair stands on a platform, gripping a microphone. In front of her, an audience of around 100 kids and their teachers.
I
can assure you that losing your mum when you're only 9 years old isn't easy. I wanted to grow up with my mum. She used to say, "When I'm a little old lady, who will I have to help me?" And I used to say, me, I will. I'll push your wheelchair for you when you're sick. But that's never going to happen because they took her away. I don't know where she is. I want an answer. I've been waiting for one for years.
The girl, Letizia, is here to bear witness. Her mother, Maria, is thought to have been murdered by the 'Ndrangheta, one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world, based in Calabria in southern Italy. After her speech, she told me what happened the day her mum went missing.
One morning, it was May 2016. Mum had to go up to our farm. I was asleep. My sister woke up just as Mum left the house. Mum saw her, said good morning to her, and then she left, saying she'd be back in a bit. She'd arranged to meet a workman at the farm. A while later, the workman called my uncle and said that the doors of my mum's car were wide open and the engine was running. He said there were traces of blood and some of her hair inside the car. There was no other trace of her, nothing. There was a camera that could have filmed the incident, which was right in front of the farm, at the gate, except it wasn't working that day. It had been tampered with, so it couldn't record anything. We don't know what happened to Mum.
Police still don't have a definitive answer, but in the run-up to her disappearance, an alleged organised crime boss had been putting pressure on Maria to sell him her land, and she'd refused. An informant later told the authorities Maria had been kidnapped and killed, her remains fed to farm animals. Her daughter's testimony is part of a broad campaign across southern Italy to prevent young people joining the world of organised crime, the world of the Sicilian Mafia, the Camorra in Naples, and the 'Ndrangheta based in Calabria.
The Mafia, the 'Ndrangheta, the Camorra, they're not just a bunch of violent people. There's more to it, and they're invisible. Organised crime touches everyone. In this case, it was me, but it's something that affects the whole of society. It could affect any one of us. If we know anything, we have to speak up. And those who don't talk, the ones who see stuff but keep quiet about it, they're collaborators.
I'm Daniel Gordon, and in this episode of Assignment from the BBC World Service, I'm here to investigate a more radical part of this battle to keep young people out of organised crime. It's called Liberi di scegliere, freedom to choose, and its main architect is also at this meeting. At first sight, Judge Roberto Di Bella doesn't look like someone crime bosses would normally be scared of, but this softly spoken middle-aged man in his smart suit and glasses is on a mission. He tells the audience about his answer to Italy's organised crime problem. The key words there are allontanare questi ragazzi dalle loro famiglie, remove kids from their families. And not just any families. He's talking about removing kids from mafia families. He says that's the way to stop them falling into a life of organised crime. It sounds extreme, but does it work? Is it really necessary? And is it right? Catania is a stunning city on the coast of Sicily. From where I'm standing, I can see the volcano, Mount Etna. And the city itself is full of beautiful Baroque buildings. There are bustling markets, there are tourists everywhere. But there's another hidden side to life here, and that's the spectre of organised crime. And this city is where Judge Roberto Di Bella runs the juvenile court. To get to his office means passing through metal detectors, and on the other side you're greeted by his bodyguards. Because for almost 30 years, Judge Di Bella's been fighting organised crime. For the last few years, he's been in Sicily, home to the Mafia. But his methods were developed in over 2 decades spent just across the water in Calabria on the Italian mainland, dealing with the 'Ndrangheta.
La mafia, l'andrangheta, la camorra, che sono un vero e proprio cancro sociale.
The Mafia, the 'Ndrangheta and the Camorra are a real social cancer. There's no doubt about it, the most powerful criminal organisation right now is the Calabrian 'Ndrangheta, which is an organisation based on the family. The members of each clan are close relatives, and that's what makes them impenetrable. Hardly any of them become informants. And the fact there have been so few informants makes them appear reliable to other criminals. They're the main partners of the Mexican and Colombian drug cartels, and they import their cocaine into Europe.
The reason you may not have heard of them is because whilst the Sicilian Mafia made headlines with high-profile assassinations and has long been the focus of Hollywood movies, the Calabrian 'Ndrangheta has all the while been quietly expanding into a monster that's now all over the world.
It's
achieved its dominance as a criminal organisation by instilling fear in people. In Calabria, murder is the main tool to resolve disputes. If someone doesn't pay protection money when it's demanded or disrespects somebody, the first response is intimidation. If it happens again, they're killed. Thanks to the money from drugs, from cocaine, the 'Ndrangheta's built its own economic empire worth billions and billions of dollars. The money gets reinvested all over the world, throughout Europe, in France, Germany, Holland, Ireland and England. And in this country, the 'Ndrangheta has a massive influence on political life, not just in Calabria, but also in northern Italy.
Judge Di Bella says young people who grow up in such mafia families have little choice but to follow in their parents' footsteps.
Ndrangheta culture, the criminal culture, passes from father to son. The kids are indoctrinated. They undergo this powerful conditioning which begins in childhood, but they're still children, and they have frailties and emotions just like other children. I found myself judging first the fathers and then the children, all for the same sort of crimes.
And the crimes he's talking about are horrific.
I've even had a 16-year-old brought before me who was involved in as many as 6 murders. He was the clan's hitman. I've seen boys who've been guilty of extortion. I've had kids who've processed large international consignments of illegal drugs for their parents. We had a 10-year-old boy who acted as a lookout for his parents while they unloaded a shipment. His job was to use an app on his phone to spot any unmarked police cars in the area. A 10-year-old child. We've had other children who've run Kalashnikovs and submachine guns from one side of Reggio Calabria to the other for their parents.
And some crimes even Judge Di Bella has struggled to comprehend.
We've even had very young boys who've been ordered to murder their own mothers after the women were accused of infidelity while their husbands were in prison. One of my most recent cases was a 15-year-old boy who tried to strangle his mother with a belt. She started to scream, and the boy let go because the neighbours intervened.
That's really shocking, what you're talking about.
These are things that belong in the Middle Ages. But unfortunately, stories like this are quite common in Calabria.
Eventually, Judge Di Bella couldn't bear it anymore.
There came a moment when I just thought enough is enough. I'm a judge who deals with the safeguarding of minors. I have an obligation to intervene. So my colleagues and I started thinking about removing these young people temporarily to let them experience a different cultural, social, psychological and emotional environment.
Do the young people involved, do they have a choice as to whether or not they get sent away, or are they forced to go?
We always try to involve them to get their consent. There are situations in which they have to be removed because they're about to commit a very serious crime, or they might be subject to retaliation. We step in to safeguard the children of mafiosi who are under 18, just the same as we intervene to safeguard the children of parents who are abusive, or alcoholics, or drug addicts.
The policy started in Calabria in 2013 and is now also operational elsewhere in Italy, including in Sicily. So far, around 100 children have been relocated. Some have been moved to nearby regions, but in more extreme cases where there's a security risk, they're sent in secret to the other end of the country. Judge Di Bella and his team stress the need for the children to maintain contact with their families, and in about a quarter of cases, the mothers go with their children. In fact, in some cases, the mothers are so desperate to escape the patriarchal world of crime, they ask to be taken away. I wanted to get a better understanding of the kind of people the judge says his project was designed to help. It's very rare to get to speak directly to someone who's in the programme, but the judge put me in touch with one of them. Lucia, not her real name, was married to an 'ndrangheta boss and had children with him. Her words are spoken by an actor.
Now, it was a life that involved a lot of suffering. Yeah, as a wife, as a woman, I counted for nothing. Basically, my role was to bring up the children within that mafia culture. And I was subjected to psychological and physical violence by my husband. He was a mafioso. He was a neighbourhood boss. My husband also involved me in his illicit, dirty business. I ended up in prison.
It must have been a very hard decision to make, to leave the life you'd led up till then.
The choice wasn't easy at all. But Judge Di Bella helped me understand what kind of life I was living. And more importantly, the kind of future my children would have if they stayed.
It wasn't possible to speak to any of the children currently involved in Judge Di Bella's project, but there's a man who knows what it's like to grow up in that world and leave it behind. I've come to a place about as far removed from that world as you can possibly imagine. I've swapped the dry mountains and Mediterranean coastline of the south for the foothills of the Alps in northern Italy. I'm on a working farm looking out across a patchwork of fields and forests. There are geese, chickens, sheep with thick white fleeces. And, as you can hear, there's a donkey too. This is the home of Josué D'Agostino. But he grew up in the south of the country in a family linked to the 'ndrangheta.
I grew up in a small town full of mobsters. I was immersed in the culture and mentality of the Mafia, of the 'ndrangheta, their culture of silence. If you see a criminal act, you're not going to talk, certainly not report it like most other people would. You just mind your own business. It was the 1980s and early 90s. There was a Mafia war going on. Families were killing each other. The rising death toll made headlines every day.
Did you personally lose relatives and friends?
I've seen them die or get sent to prison for life. People were dying all the time. The cemeteries are full of people who grew up with me. We played football together as children.
Josué had always tried to avoid getting sucked in. But then, at the age of 16, his life changed.
Sono stato arrestato proprio quella notte lì. Mentre dormivo a casa, sono arrivati i carabinieri. I was at home asleep when the police appeared and arrested me. A rich guy had been shot during a robbery. They said they'd found evidence that I'd done it. I hadn't, but I knew who had. And I refused to tell them who the real culprit was, because if I did, I would be killed. I followed the rules of the 'ndrangheta. I was silent, and I went to prison.
You've said you were arrested for an attempted murder that you didn't do. But, I mean, everybody says that.
The judge called me at one point, just before the sentencing, and told me, "You're the same age as my son. Tell me who did it. I know it wasn't you." Because I had a strong alibi confirmed by witnesses. So basically, I was convicted for not cooperating. Still, I'm not innocent. I covered up for someone who committed this crime. But I didn't try to murder anyone.
Josue was 16 when he went to prison. He got a 5.5-year sentence and was sent to a young offenders institution. Ironically, because he'd refused to cooperate with the police, he was now seen as a prime recruit for the 'Ndrangheta.
Non aver parlato, quindi aver superato la prova da questo punto
I
di
hadn't
vista.
talked, so therefore I'd passed a crucial test as far as they were concerned. This meant I was precisely what they were looking for. It was a guarantee that if I got caught, I wouldn't talk. In their eyes, it was like I'd graduated. People started referring to me in a different way, not as a child, but as a man.
Come un bambino, ma come un uomo.
So inadvertently, you'd actually qualified to be a member of the 'Ndrangheta.
Sì, sì, era come un esame.
Yes, it was like an exam, and I'd passed.
This left Josue in an impossible position. His stretch in the Young Offenders Institution had given him time to reflect, and he'd realised he didn't want to end up like the others and join the 'Ndrangheta.
Non avevo una personalità come
I was different to the others, I could see that. There were lots of things we just didn't have in common. I was for friendship, brotherhood, not crime. In the Mafia, they talked a lot about friendship, but it's all nonsense. There is no friendship. Someone might be a friend today, but tomorrow you'll quite happily shoot him and think nothing of it.
But in those days, for somebody like him who wanted out, there was no programme like Freedom to Choose.
quello che bisognava fare 30 anni fa.
That's what was needed 30 years ago, but nobody was doing it. There was nobody to back me.
Decades later, when Lucia was facing a similar dilemma, escaping from her husband's 'Ndrangheta clan, there was help on hand. She and her children left in secret before dawn. Carrying just a few essentials, they were whisked away in an unmarked police car.
Avevo paura. C'era il rischio che qualcuno potesse
I was
scoprire
scared,
qualcosa.
knowing that someone might suspect something. They might get wind of the fact I decided to take the kids of a mafia boss away. So everything had to be done very, very quickly, and we had to be very careful. So there's no doubt about it. Leaving was very traumatic for us. Even though we were given an escort to the airport by plainclothes police, it was only once we were on the plane that we started to relax.
And what's your life like now?
Oggi posso dire che sono una donna
Today,
molto serena.
I can say I feel completely at peace. I live like everyone else now. I work, I look after my children, I go out with my new friends. I'm a free woman, free in my thoughts, free to go where I want, free to bring my children up to obey the law. But there's no hiding the fact that deep inside I'm scared. That fear might be dormant right now, but sooner or later it'll come alive again. Because one of these days my ex-husband will get out of prison. I don't want to think about that now. I just want to be with my children and enjoy some peace of mind.
And how are your children now? How have they taken to their new life?
I miei figli sono non sereni.
They're more than just at peace. They're really happy. Every day when I look at them, I see children who just don't have a care in the world. And their teachers say these kids are models of honesty. That's the thing that reminds me I've made the right choice.
Contact was maintained with the family in general and their father. That was until one day they received a threatening letter from him in prison.
Una lettera molto, molto brutta per I miei figli, ma anche per me.
It was truly a horrible letter. In it, he said his children were dead to him. He's been telling people we all died in a car accident. He said he was ashamed to have children like them and they weren't fit to bear his surname. When my son read that, he said, he's ashamed. It's us who are ashamed of having a mobster for a father who ruined our lives. My husband valued the underworld more than love for his own children.
Ha scelto la malavita al posto di scegliere l'amore per I propri figli.
For some children, leaving is arguably even harder. Most of those in the project are teenagers who often find themselves living in a very different part of Italy, leaving behind everything they've ever known.
uno si domanda, ma cosa è più traumatico?
You have to ask, which is more traumatic? Your dad giving you a gun and taking you to shoot? Or what we're trying to do?
Enrico Interdonato is a psychologist. I meet him at a city farm in the town of Messina, with views out to sea and Calabria lying a few miles away across the water. He's one of a team of professionals on hand to help such teenagers adapt to their new lives. And he himself grew up around the kids of mafiosi.
Sì, loro hanno un po' quell'atteggiamento.
They have a bit of that tough guy attitude. You can see them with a Rolex or a Gucci jacket. That lifestyle's very attractive for teenagers. There's a strong, ready-made identity they can just assume. And it brings with it respect.
Enrico tells me how he goes about changing their outlook.
Tutti i ragazzi all'inizio sono arrabbiati, non sono contenti.
All the kids are angry at first. What I do is turn this exile from home into a learning experience. Like when students go and study abroad, then you see the real boy. It's like a balloon bursting. They lower the mask just a little bit and we can see that they've suffered. These are kids who grew up with grief at home. They've often seen their parents and siblings taken away by the police but had no way of processing that emotional trauma. Mafia kids hardly ever express emotions because if they did, they might give themselves away or betray someone else. I tell them, open up your mind. Nobody knows you here, so what are you worrying about? You can fold your arms and stay locked in your room, counting down the days for the next couple of years until you can go back home. Or you could come out for a beer tonight.
Do many of them, have you seen many of them come back?
Ci sono ragazzi che sono tornati.
Some of the guys have gone back to Calabria, and a few have even gotten arrested because they've gone back to a life of crime and ended up in prison. But it's wrong to think that freedom to choose is only valid if a guy who's been through it never gets arrested again. It's the right thing for the state to at least give them a chance.
Show an opportunity, just one.
Back in Catania, Judge Di Bella freely admits there was some hostility at first, but over the years he's won over a lot of his critics. The project's been approved by the government and is funded by the Catholic Church.
In the
first few years, we got a lot of flack. They called me a child thief, accused me of confiscating children, deporting minors. We were even compared to the Nazis or Stalin. None of that's true. These are very delicate measures that we implement on a case-by-case basis in situations where there's clear evidence that's prejudicial to the child.
Still, in 2023, the programme is up for government review. For Judge Di Bella, ending it would be a huge mistake. Simply arresting people is not the solution, he says. You have to tackle the very basis of the criminal organisations.
Before the Freedom to Choose project came along, the fight against the Mafia and the 'Ndrangheta was all about big police operations, arresting big mob bosses, seizing their assets and so on. But a crucial piece of the puzzle was missing. We have to face the fact that youth is at the root of the 'Ndrangheta Mafia phenomenon. And so any serious policy to combat the Mafia and the 'Ndrangheta has to start with young people.
Looking back on his life from the tranquility of his farm in northern Italy, Josue agrees with the judge. He himself had a narrow escape from the world of the 'Ndrangheta. Back when he was serving his sentence, he'd made up his mind that he wanted out. He was about to be moved to an adult prison, where he knew he'd be fully indoctrinated into the clan. Then, at the last minute, a general prisoner amnesty was announced, which meant his sentence got reduced and he could be released early to serve the remainder on parole. But being back in the community, amid a mafia war, was an equally scary prospect. He knew that his life could be in danger, and not just from rival clans. His own family could be a threat too.
Refusing to take part in something so important was tantamount to joining the other side. That was my biggest fear. In order to kill you, an enemy clan has to hunt you down first, but your family knows exactly where to find you and what your movements are.
He spent the next year and a half trying to convince his family that someone like him could never be a successful gangster, until finally he felt it was safe to leave. And even then, he had to walk away empty-handed.
Financially, I was down to my underwear, quite literally. I walked away with just a change of clothes in a suitcase.
It took him years to build the life he has now. Today, as well as running a farm and a guest house, he tours schools to tell his story in support of the work of Judge Di Bella. Chatting with Josue as we walk back to his farmhouse, he says he knows he could have made more money if he'd stayed south and joined the 'Ndrangheta, always assuming he didn't get killed, that is. But spiritually, he feels he's ended up a richer man.
Life is much better if you live honestly, building only what you need, and doing that by grafting. You can find peace that way, and your conscience will be clear. You don't have to worry that you've only got what you have by hurting someone else. All around me now, all I see is beauty. I have a beautiful house, a beautiful family, and when I go to sleep at night, I'm at peace. I don't have to be looking over my shoulder all the time. I'm happy with what little I have. And to me, that's no small thing.
This episode of Assignment was presented by me, Daniel Gordon, and the producer was Alex Last.